Blog Talk Radio.
Blessings from the Darkness is an eclectic collection of writings by a talented and diverse group of writers and published authors in dedication of and in support of our dearest friend, the award-winning and best-selling author Yvonne Mason and her son. All sales of this anthology, present and future, are donated to her in support of her son, who at the time of this publication has been ill and out of work and struggling to support his family due to an undiagnosed illness. Yvonne has been an inspiration, selflessly supportive, and a dear friend to many aspiring writers and indie authors. She believes in paying it forward, offering her knowledge and insights and friendship to kindred souls. Yvonne has a saying: she threatens to let loose the flying monkeys when there is wrongness in the lives of those near and dear to her. So after bringing us together for a successful and fun-filled double anthology by Yvonne, including notable authors and first-time published writers, and after learning about the continued troubles of her son and his family, we came together as such monkeys to fly free, far, and wide in what we do best. G.L. Lentz. This book can be purchased at Amazon.com, Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and www.blackbedsheetbooks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Off the Chain, and I am your host, Yvonne Mason. And tonight, before we get started, I wanted to give you guys a little heads up. There is a new website for the Off the Chain show, and on that website I am offering authors, musicians, artists, entrepreneurs, people with a platform, people with foundations, whatever it is, I am offering, almost giving away ad space for this show. And it starts at $5 a show. It does not get any better than that. And if we run a 2-hour show, it's still $5 a show. So if I'm running a 2-hour show for a musician, your ad will be run at least twice, maybe 3 times. So you want to get your work out there, you want to get your foundation out there, you want to get your passion out there, or your platform, or you even want to promote another radio show. You can do it one of 2 ways. You can either email me the information and I'll record it, or you can record it and send it to me in an MP3 file, and I'll send you a bill, and there you go. Now, if you go on the website and go under the search engine Radio Host Yvonne Mason, and you'll see Off the Chain with radio host and author Yvonne Mason, go to the page that says Pricing for Ads, and it will show you the breakdown. The more shows you do, the less it costs you. That is my public service announcement for the night. Now, on to the fun stuff. My guest tonight lives in Battle Creek, Michigan, with his wife and his children, and he works as a medical language specialist. For over 2 decades, he has been a contributor to several different outlets in the independent music and film scene, including articles, reviews, and artwork. He loves music, rain, sarcasm, dry humor, and cheese. He has a strong disdain for dishonesty and hard-boiled eggs. We will talk about that. He has written for Famous Monsters of Filmland, Rue Morgue, and Scream magazines, and is a regular contributor to horror novel reviews, Halloweenforevermore, and Heavy Planet. You can find his published works there. Chad Lutz, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Yvonne.
I am so glad you are here because there are several burning questions in this bio that we will discuss.
All right.
Now, see, you and I get along because I do have a very dry sense of humor and a bit of sarcasm, as you know, from reading my post and talking to me for the few years that we've been friends on Facebook. And speaking of that, tell me, or tell our listening audience how you started your journey in all of this. How did you get from point A to where you are today?
You mean just with writing?
with writing, with in the film industry, in the art industry, in the music industry. I mean, you're so well rounded. I'm almost jealous.
Well, the stuff that I did with like film and all of that was all independent. I had a magazine that I self-published and edited probably 15 years ago, and it covered underground music scene, mainly punk rock, and the independent film scene. And I had a lot of stuff sent to me through the mail for review, stuff from like Trauma Films and some other film companies, and I got to do a lot of interviews with like famous like independent film stars like Bruce Campbell and people in the independent music scene like Henry Rollins and a guy from the Misfits and a bunch of other bands, and it got to be a little too much, and I quit doing that. So as far as being involved with that kind of thing, almost from like a journalistic standpoint, it was nothing that I made money out of. If anything, I just got a bunch of free movies and free music and free magazines, and then of course just bragging rights to say that I interviewed this person or that person. But I've always been. Go ahead.
No, finish your sentence.
I was just going to say I've always been artistic and involved in or attracted to art or anything except for reading. I've always hated reading, and I would read magazines like Famous Monsters of Filmland when I was a kid, or horror comics, or Fangoria. And I actually, by the time I was in my early 20s, I'd only read like one book. It just couldn't grab my attention. And so I went to college, took an English class, and I had to write some essays, and I was horrible at it. There was just red ink all over each paper that I would turn in. And I ended up quitting college, and then I think a year later I started I started reading. And I read tons of books that year and the next year, and then I thought I'd write some stories, and that's it. The English classes in high school and in college didn't seem to ever really do anything for me, but until I started picking up actual books and reading them, that lent me a vocabulary, and I paid attention to punctuation, and I've always been a decent speller, so that wasn't any kind of problem. But it wasn't until I actually started reading that I got any good at writing at all. And so I spent the first 25 years of my life just avoiding books altogether, which is a shame, because now I'm in my 40s, and I'm trying to catch up on all these books still that so many of my peers have already read.
Why did you dislike reading?
I think I probably just found it boring, and because I had such cool magazines to look at. I've always been involved in music too, so I had a lot of music magazines and wanted to be, I wanted to be like Gene Simmons. To me that was like music and horror mixed together. And so I would just like to stare at all those pictures, and I'd like to look at the pictures in Fangoria magazine and Famous Monsters, and I would read some of the articles and stuff. For the most part, I would just kind of daydream at the pictures, and I like the idea of reading. I like the idea of feeling like I was, just read a book and then put it on my shelf, and there it is, a trophy, that I could look at and go, I read that, and then eventually have a whole shelf, and then two, and then a whole bookshelf. But I just couldn't ever get past a chapter and really, I don't know. It's not that I had ADD, but I was just, I guess, too active. I just wasn't interested in that until much later.
Do you remember the first book that you read that you really enjoyed?
I think that I read in elementary I read a book called, and of course I'm excluding children's books. I read children's books when I was a kid, but I'm talking about, books without pictures and stuff. I read a book, and I can't remember who wrote it. I think it was called The House with the Clock in Its Walls. It's a horror like middle grade probably, and I think it's fairly popular, but I can't remember who wrote it. And I read that, and then I read most of the Amityville horror when that whole phenomenon was happening in the what was it, very early 80s, when it was supposed to have been true, and I found it so fascinating. And so it just creeped me out, and so my mom had a copy of that book, and I didn't read it cover to cover. I would try to search for, all the scary bits, and so I would kind of, I guess, fast forward through the book, but I can't remember the first book where I decided I'm going to be a reader now. It was probably either Dean Koontz or Stephen King, one of the two.
Have you ever read any of Poe's work?
Oh yeah, I've read nearly all of it. Yep.
Do you agree or disagree that he is one of the preeminent horror writers of our time without the gore?
Oh, absolutely. It's very cerebral, and it really. I mean, he has some underlying themes that are kind of similar from one story to the next. Fear of being buried, whether it be in a wall or under the ground. He's got a handful of stories like that. But for the most part, though he's a hard read, you can't just sit down, relax, and shut your mind off because, that was written a long time ago. So some of it is harder to, you got to slow down when you're reading that. And some sentences you might not even understand, but that's okay. And he's so descriptive that stories like Telltale Heart, which is probably my favorite short story of all time, I mean, it's so intense when that guy is trying to creep in slowly into that guy's room. And Poe really just, he really does it. He's probably my favorite short story writer next to Clive Barker.
See, I knew that I liked you for some reason other than the fact that you are a very fantastic writer. And the reason I ask that is because, like you said, the books that we read lend to the way that we write.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's for sure.
That comes through in your writings and the writings that I have read. I just find it fascinating that you were a young adult before and got all the red marks on your English writing paper. Don't feel bad. When I was in high school, I couldn't turn in an English writing paper that it wasn't red marked all over God's green acre. They kept telling me I couldn't write, and I kept telling them, watch me. So, you see, we both arrived at the same spot.
Yeah.
Because people said we couldn't write, but yet we can. But I've read all my life. In fact, I read Poe when I was probably 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah. And if I don't think that I would, because Poe, as I mentioned before, that he's such a hard read, I think that I would be completely turned off by that just because I would be like, this is reading. And when I think about it, I think that I kind of blame my school for my dislike for reading, because whenever we were forced to read something in high school, it was something that no kid is interested in reading anyway, and not to put down the books because they're good, but when you're 12, 13, 14 years old, you don't want to read All Is Quiet on the Western Front or A Diary of Anne Frank or just books that you have. There's nothing in your life that you can relate with these books at all. So, and it's not an escape for you. So it was kind of a poor example. And so when we were forced to read something, or like Romeo and Juliet, I hadn't been in love. I didn't get that. I didn't understand that. So all these books that I was forced to read, or plays or whatever, those were my examples of how books are. And so that I kind of blame that too for looking the other way or running the other way when presented with the opportunity to read, because the examples that I have were horrible. Well, I have, but yet in another school in the same town, my friend was reading in his English class. They were reading The Hobbit and they were reading Poe. Had I been in that school, who knows how I might have started a decade or so earlier.
That's true. That's very true, because I agree that what we are exposed to has, and this is true in anything we do, what we are exposed to can sometimes direct our path. But on the flip side of that, when you went to college and got the red marks all over your English papers, consciously or unconsciously, it redirected you to go back and read, to see what made writers tick and how they ticked and how they wrote and what they wrote, which in turn made you a better writer.
Yeah.
On that note, let's switch gears a little bit before we talk about your books, because inquiring minds want to know.
Okay.
What is a medical language specialist?
It is a fancy term for medical transcriptionist, which is just someone who, every time that you go and you visit a doctor, whether you have a headache, sinus infection, or you broke your leg, or whatever, it's recorded, and it has to be transcribed, whether it be by computer or voice recognition, which still has to go through an editing system, or through a human being. Then it has to be recorded. Notes are taken. Sometimes doctors may have even, spoken into some kind of recorder in front of you, going through the list. So, and sometimes when you go visit the hospital or the doctor, you get a printout of something of your medical history, and that is, in a nutshell, that printout that you get is basically what I do for a living. So I have to listen to audio files of doctors and surgeons and all kinds of physicians, and listen to the patient's past medical history and the physical exam if they had one, and any kind of diagnoses and medication list. And I just have to make a very accurate report of all that. And sometimes it's almost like putting a puzzle together sometimes, because sometimes the doctors like to make words up, in particular adjectives that don't exist, and sometimes they even get things wrong as far as dosages on medications. And my job too is to look out for things like that, so that the report can be more accurate, the doctor can sound smarter, and then it goes into their record from there. It's a neat job, and it's a work at home. So the only problem with it is, since I'm a writer as well, I can't seem to get away from a keyboard now. So I'm always attached to a computer somehow.
I understand that. 24/7, from the time I get up to the time I go to bed. If it's not the books, it's the radio show, it's the blog. It's because as indie authors, we have to market ourselves. And if we don't market ourselves, people don't know we're out there.
Yes, and that is very time-consuming.
Yes.
For sure.
But that being said, if we didn't market ourselves, you and I would have never met, and hence you would have never been on this show.
That's right.
It is a good thing. Now, inquiring minds want to know one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
What is it with you and hard-boiled eggs?
It's more like, what is it with you who like them? Because when someone cracks one open, I think someone farted. And every time I see because that's what I smell. And so every time I see someone eating that, I pretty much gag, and I just think, how can you eat that solidified fart? And it just doesn't make any sense to me. I've always hated them my whole life, and they're just horrible.
Ladies and gentlemen, I told you this show is called Off the Chain, and it's called Off the Chain for this very reason. We never know where our conversations are going to go. My guest tonight is author Chad Lutz, and we have been discussing his history and his current employment and how he got in the profession that he's in as far as medical language specialist and an author on top of everything. And if you're just joining us, what he just told me is that as a child he didn't read. So when he went to college, English teachers like to red ink his papers, because if you're not a reader, you cannot write. And you can write, but you can't write effectively, because, like Chad says, when one reads books, one's mind is open. One learns language, one learns structure, one learns new vocabulary, one learns settings, characters, attitudes, personalities. What else, Chad?
Style.
Style.
You can learn style. Sure.
Dialect.
Or just use, dialect, new vocabulary, for sure.
Culture.
Yeah, you can learn culture.
History, because there are those of us that do a lot of period pieces. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're thinking of getting into the writing industry and you're not a reader, I think Chad would agree with me that one of the first things that you must do is read. Am I right, Chad?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because if you don't, then you stifle your creative ability to do what you want to do. And on that note, let's talk about one of my favorite books that you wrote, that when I saw the cover and I saw the title, I'm going, how in the world can these two things mesh? Now, to me, that was a popping cover because the title itself lends one to pick up the book. And for you all that are listening, the title of his book is Of Foster Homes and Flies. And I can see in my mind's eye some of y'all are going, what? What do foster homes and flies have to do with each other? Well, I'm going to let Chad, if he will, explain the background of this book and explain in what tone he wrote it and why he wrote it that way. So, Chad, teach us.
Okay. The book is about a 12-year-old boy who wakes up one morning to find that his alcoholic mother has passed away in her sleep. And we find out between him waking up and him finding her, which isn't necessarily a spoiler. I state that right in the back of the book. In most of the book, she's never really alive through the whole book anyway, but she's dead at the very beginning. But that between him waking up and him finding her, we find that he has been neglected and his father has passed away years prior, and he's basically been a latchkey kid and just taking care of himself while his mom wastes away smoking cigarettes and drinking liquor, and abusive physically and mentally, verbally. And so he basically takes care of himself, and he before he finds his mother, we find out that there is something that's approaching at school, a spelling bee that he's having that he's really excited to attend, because last year's spelling bee he didn't sign up for. He was too scared to, and he regretted it for an entire year and promised himself and told himself that he was going to absolutely enter this year's spelling bee. And so when he finds out his mother's dead, then he decides that he's not going to tell anybody. And so the rest of the book is him dealing with life for the next week with his mother's rotting corpse and a couple of relationships that he has. There's a couple of characters that he runs into and has some relationships with, and it's just basically I've marketed it as horror, I guess more of dark fiction, but I found that people who don't like horror at all really like the book, and the people who like even extreme horror like the book a lot too. So it touches on both of those. There's some disgusting scenes, and then there's a lot of really emotional stuff in it too. And I wrote the book in first person, present tense, because I had written probably 2/3 of the book in past tense, and then as I was writing, I thought, I think this would be better present tense, and so I started experiment with some sentences and changed a couple of paragraphs, and sure enough, I thought this is going to work much better because it will help I had read something like a year prior that was written in first person present tense, and I thought, man, it sounds more like somebody's really telling me a story right now, and I'm there more, and I wanted people to get emotionally involved, and I thought that tense would do it more than past, and
but you not only wrote it in you did not only wrote it in present tense, but tell our listeners the voice that you wrote it in, because how you captured this voice at the age that you are is indescribable, because most of us don't remember that age.
I wrote in first person as the 12-year-old boy, and I just drew on. I have a kind of a ridiculous memory. I remember all the way probably till about maybe 3.5. Not every day, but I remember moments. And then I definitely remember growing up as a preteen and a teenager, and I had a lot of good memories to draw from. I can't relate to the things that Denny, the main character, I can't relate to what he went through, but I just tried the best I could to put myself in that position. What would someone do if they were already hardened? Would they might not even cry. They might have mixed feelings, of relief that they don't have to deal with this anymore, but then also pain because they are truly alone now, something that maybe he always wanted, but now that he has it, maybe he doesn't want it.
What I found amazing about the book was, as I'm reading this book, I see this 12-year-old child. Now, ladies and gentlemen, he used the verbiage that a 12-year-old child might use. And you literally feel for this child. You want this child to be okay. You don't want this child to go through what he is going through this entire book, because it cannot possibly end well. And Chad, what you did with this child is you made this child real. And because I have dealt with Child and Protection Services for many, many years, and I hate them with a passion, and I could relate to the fear that this child was having if it was found out that his mother was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what was so poignant about the book, because, like you said, this child had a dream, and he wanted to fulfill that dream, and in order to fulfill that dream, he had to live a lie.
Yeah.
Because if he didn't, someone was going to come take him away.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you, that is one of the best books I have ever read in my entire life.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That's great to hear.
It made me hurt. And
Mm-hmm.
and you know me, I write true crime. Very little makes me hurt. I sympathize and empathize. But this child and the way that you portrayed him, because not only was he 12 years old in the story, but as a 12-year-old, he is beginning to hit puberty.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is he dealing with his mother dying, but think about it as a real child. He's dealing with his mother's death. He's dealing with this dream he has, and then he's dealing with all these emotional, hormonal upheavals that are going on in his own body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I approach the book. And I'm thinking, this cannot end well. It just cannot end well. And I'm not going to give any of it away, but to say that you did a magnificent job.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome very much. So now let's talk about One for the Road.
Mm-hmm.
I read a little bit about it, and it is very, very interesting. I am going to download that book.
Okay.
But tell the audience about this book.
Well, it's just a short story, and it was the first thing. It was the first thing that I had written after deciding for almost 20 years that I wasn't going to write. because after I read all those books for those couple of years and I wrote 4 short stories, and that was like 1993 or 94 or something like that. And then I stopped writing until 2014. And a friend of mine whose father used to be my best friend, and I'm talking about Ian Bush. You know Ian.
Yeah, I know.
His father and I grew up together. And so that's kind of how I got to know Ian a little bit. So he's much, I'm old enough to be his father, but I saw that he had won a local contest writing, and I thought, man, that is great. That this kid is, I think Ian was only 17 or 18 at the time, that this kid is like really going for it. And you don't find a whole lot of writers, and he seems to like be keeping himself out of trouble, and he's writing, and he's trying to just do it. And so I got really inspired to do that just by kind of watching him. And so One for the Road is the first thing I had written after like 20 years. And I just had gotten this idea of, whenever I come up with ideas for stories or a book or something, I ask myself a lot of like what-if questions, like what if this were to happen? And I think a lot of writers do that. And it's a good way to come up with oddball scenarios. And I thought, what if Anne Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank, what if that dealt with, like instead of hiding a Jewish girl, what if they had to hide a zombie that was a loved one, and they were just trying to keep this thing away from the government, because the government at this point has gone on lockdown, and I explain a little bit about being punished if you get caught with harboring, like kind of like harboring a fugitive, but if you get caught harboring someone who was carrying this disease around with them, that you could get into a lot of trouble. And I can't remember exactly what the sentence was, that what they were facing if they got caught. And at the time that I couldn't get the idea out of my head, and I thought it would be a neat one. And I didn't want to write it initially because the market was complete, whether it be movies or games or literature, the market is absolutely saturated with zombie fiction. Just zombies everywhere. And I didn't want to kind of jump on that bandwagon. But I couldn't get the story out of my head, so I thought I'm going to write this one story, and that I think is going to be good. And so I did, and it's got good reception. A lot of people, wish it was longer, because I think it's only, I don't even know if it's 4,000 words. But I like it, and people still are reading it and everything, and it was fun. But like I said, I didn't even want to write it in the first place, because I don't like writing stuff that has been done before, and I felt uncomfortable even entertaining the idea. But I'm glad I wrote it.
Well, as you made a very excellent statement, as writers, when those voices get in our heads and won't shut up, if we don't put it on paper, they will drive us crazy until we do. So it's a good thing that you wrote it, because had you not, we may not be having this conversation, because you would have been insane.
Okay.
Trust me on this one. They just stay in my head all the time. What about Two Before Dawn? Now, that is another interesting one.
That is just I had an idea of putting out like 2 short stories and this was before I started writing longer fiction, putting out 2 short stories at a time in little collections. So that was my first double feature collection, and I have 2 stories in there. One of them is a story about, I don't want to say what it's about. It's kind of, that would give it away, but it won, I think it was 2nd place or 3rd place, I can't remember, for some writing contest. And I decided to put it in the Two Before Dawn. And then the other story is a story that can be found in my anthology, Night of the Catalyst. And it's probably my favorite short story, or at least in my top 2. and it is about a vampire, which is something else I didn't want to write about again, but I had this idea. The vampires have been done to death in movies and games and literature. But I had this idea. I thought, what if there was a vampire that he's been around for so long. When's the last time he's seen the sun? The sun is beautiful. Would they ever miss the sun? Would they ever just get tired of living? And so I wrote this short story about this vampire who hates living on the planet anymore just because it's gotten to the point where it's just an evil place. Even with him in it and all the damage that he's done, he hates it here because man against man, father against daughter, son against father, rebelliousness and chaos and drugs and murder and all this. And so he takes his desire to be rid of all of that, the idea that he hasn't seen the sun so long, and so he decides to commit suicide via looking at one last sunset. So he goes off into and it's kind of it's an homage to my biological father who passed away before I ever got published, and he's the person who really got me to start reading. And so it was kind of I put an author note at the end exactly why it's for him. But so yeah, it's just kind of like a tragic, romanticized story about something that's a subject that's very dark. So, but yeah, it's one of my favorites, and it's written. The language is kind of poesque, not anywhere near that. In that league at all as far as vocabulary and stuff, but that is the kind of like the voice that I drew from. It's in first person, and you can tell that his voice is more intellectual and something older and somebody that's been around for a long time. The way he speaks, like kind of eloquently.
Oh yeah, I'm going to get that one as well. Do you have? I mean, you're now up there on my list of top authors, and I keep going back to A Foster Homes and Flies because I can't tell you enough about that book. It's one of those books that stays with you.
Mm-hmm.
But have you got some new stuff coming out?
Yeah, I have. I was invited to do an author friend of mine. He's a best-selling horror author, and he has written several books. And he contacted 4 authors and asked us if we would like to write novellas based around a novel that he was going to release. So on October 1st, what's that, next week sometime, Jay Thorne will release his novel American Demon Hunters, which is about this little group of I think he's 12, 13, 14-year-old boy and his father, and then the father's, and they are these kind of traveling demon hunters. Think of it as like the TV shows like X-Files meets Supernatural kind of, and they just each book there's the novel that Jay wrote, and then there's the novellas that myself and we each have our own. Zach Bohannon, Bettina Meller, and John L. Monk all wrote novellas using those characters, and then so that's coming out, and then it's not. It was a lot of fun to do it, and I really like all those people that I didn't know Bettina and John L. Monk before this, but I'm glad that I got to know them through the process. But I knew Jay Thorne and Zach Bohannon beforehand, and they're really, really just incredible people, and they have the Horror Writers podcast. And so it was a lot of fun to work and do that with those guys. And then I'm working on a serialized novel called Pale White, and it is another kind of coming of age, but it deals with three girls who find out one day when they wake up that they are vampires, and they've been vampires or on the verge of being vampires for 4 years. And the way that has happened is they had been rescued from a sex trafficking ring by a vampire, and who has kept them fed, but he did it to where they didn't fully turn so they could still deal with sunlight and stuff. But then he takes off, and he goes and commits suicide, and that's kind of like that short story that I mentioned before, Self-Immolation, that's in Two Before Dawn. That is him. So that's basically what happened to him. But so the book is about these three girls who go on this road trip to exact revenge on the names that this vampire caretaker or whatever that had been caring for them for 4 years. He left behind some names for them that if they wanted to go after these men that were responsible for having them at such an early age, because they're teenagers now, but they were as early as 9 and I think up to 14 when they were in the ring and stuck in the sex trafficking ring. And so he left behind contact information and names if they would want to do whatever they felt they needed to do. He left it in their hands and said, don't come looking for me. Here's some money. I will be gone. I'm sorry that I did this to you. But now that he's not there to feed them, and I do like an explanation as to why they weren't fully turned and now they are. It has everything to do with him mixing his blood with something else's blood. And so now that he's not able to do that, they fully turn. This whole 4 years, they've been under kind of like a spell with no real memory and no real reason to question anything that was going on around them. Kind of like having really heavy scales on their eyes. And then one day, when they can't feed on his blood anymore, they wake up and they're like, wow, okay, we suddenly realize what's happening here. But there's nobody to answer any questions other than the notes that they received from the guy that was taking care of them. So it's a road trip. It's a coming of age revenge road trip, basically, with some vampirism. I guess kind of like if you were to take the movie Near Dark and maybe a little bit of Lost Boys, and they just travel to a couple different states along the West Coast and wreak havoc on those that have it coming to them. And it's going to be kind of emotional and stuff, kind of like Foster Homes and Flies. It's just, I guess that's what I'm kind of attracted to. But I don't know when that will be out.
That's going to be another one I got to
read. But that will come out it's going to be serialized, so I'm going to just put it out into novellas, like 3 different novellas. And hopefully I'll probably release them all at the same time, sometime in either very early winter or very late fall. And I have a couple books that are coming out that I have stories in, but that I don't know when they're coming out. But as far as me, what's that?
What are the books that are coming out with your story? What are the name of those books that are coming out with your stories in them?
I was invited to write a story in Terry M. West's Car Next world. So I wrote a story called From Hell They Came, and I think Terry told me last I knew, I think he was going to release that sometime in October. And that's just it's a short story. And he's had some other authors do the same thing. And then I just had my story, Loon Age Daydream, come out in a David Bowie tribute anthology, and all of the money for that goes to cancer research. And then I think something else is coming out, and I can't remember. There's a couple things that were supposed to come out a little bit earlier, and now I have no idea of their release date, so I can't even speculate on that. Sometimes it takes a while when it's not in your hands for things to come out.
Well, what we'll do is right before they're released, and it'll probably be sometime next year, let's get you back in here so we can talk about them and let everybody know where they are so they'll know where to go look for them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't read any of my guest author Ted Lutzke's books, novellas, or short stories, I recommend them highly because he writes along the lines of Poe and Lovecraft and some of those classic horror authors that you don't see much anymore. And they're dark horror without being over the top. And your stories have morals behind them. They have life's lessons behind them. Like, for instance, the one we just talked about, the road trip. Yeah, he turned them, but he turned them to protect them.
Right. But at the same time, he kind of feels guilty that, I mean, here he is going off to kill himself because he hates this world, and now he just cursed them with the curse that he's had. Who knows how long they're going to have to stick around in it, and it's probably only going to get worse. So, there's some guilt there for him.
But he also left them with resources.
Yeah.
Because they were already damaged, and who knows how long they would have lived had he not gone and gotten them and turned them. So he took damaged merchandise, basically, and made, for all intents and purposes, something good, and now he's leaving it up to them whether or not they want to go get them.
Yeah, he definitely pulled them from a very bad environment where they're sexually abused. I don't get into any of that. I start the book after the fact, and I don't get any kind of graphic detail about anything, that happened to them. I mean, I don't see any sense in it. People know what rape means, and they can figure it out for themselves what kind of hell that these poor girls had probably gone through. And
it leaves the reader to use their own imagination, and sometimes, in most cases, and I've read books since I was 5 years old, in most cases, less is more, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That gives the reader the ability to imagine.
Yeah. Yep.
And to form their own conclusions. So I say you write like Poe. I love it. I absolutely love it. What I want to do now is let these folks know where you can be found so that they can go and look you up. I know you're on Facebook, but you have websites and all that. So let folks know where you can be found.
Okay. You can go to www.chadlutzke.com, and that's ChadLutzke, and I have links there to my I think my Amazon author page, which you can find all the books, all the anthologies that I've been in or magazines, and I've got a blog on there too where I've interviewed some other authors, or I've just spoke about random things or made announcements, and you can, if you sign up, you can go to my, right there at the front of my page is something you can click on, and where you can get a couple of free short stories if you sign up for my newsletter. And then basically the newsletter, it's not anything that, I don't spam anybody. Maybe once a month I'll send the announcement of something that's coming out new, or I like to have giveaways. I've given a lot of books away, like print copies of books, and just stuff like that. It's not anything that I value the readers, and I respect their trusting me with their email, so I don't want to take advantage of that. So I keep the emailing to a minimum because nobody wants to have their inbox bogged down with a bunch of stuff. But yeah,
well,
you can
let
get
me
free.
Ask you this. Let me ask you this, because we're going to run out of time. And I don't want to run out of time because I'm enjoying this show very much.
Okay.
I ask all of my guests the same question because each guest that I have brings something to the table. How would you, or what would you say to someone who asks you this question? What do I do to make my dream real?
Are we talking specifically writing, or just anything that they're passionate about? Or
in general.
In general. you are the only person that is ever going to stop you from doing that, and you have to keep that in mind. So if you're not succeeding, it's because of you. And so, I've seen guitarists with no arms, painters with no arms or whatever, and, that's to the extreme side. But some people, we can be lazy and think that things need to happen for us overnight, and it just doesn't happen like that. So if you want to be a good guitarist or a good writer or be good at anything to where it really pleases you, then you need to take the time to invest, to practice and hone that craft, whatever it is that you may be, and don't compare yourself to other people, and don't try to be, jumping on some kind of bandwagon. Just do, whatever it is that pleases you, and to the best of your ability, and that's all you can do is your best. But if you're not trying, and by trying, I mean practicing, if you want to write. Don't just read books about writing and talk about it and join Facebook groups and write. You got to write, And the same goes for playing an instrument or something like that, or learning to paint. You just got to put in time. Stick with it. You'll get better each and every day that you every week that goes by that you're actually taking the time to get better at something. You are going to get better at it.
Do you agree that to have tried is to have succeeded, but to have just done nothing is to have already failed?
If you don't do anything that you would like to do, if you don't take
right.
the steps,
right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not gonna, it's not gonna fall into your lap.
You've got to get up and, in other words, if you want a sandwich, you don't sit in your chair and say, "Oh, I want a sandwich," and it magically appears. You have to get up, go to the kitchen, open the refrigerator, get out the condiments, get out the bread, get out whatever you're going to put on that sandwich, put it together, and put it in your mouth and chew it and swallow it. Do you agree that is succeeding in getting a sandwich? If you just sit there and say, "Oh, I want a sandwich," but you never go get it, you fail to get that sandwich. Pursuing one's dream is along the same lines, that if you don't at least try it, that at the end of your days, when you're looking at your life in retrospect and you're saying, "Well, I shoulda, I woulda, and I coulda, but I didn't."
Right.
And you have no one to blame but yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of my go ahead, sweetheart.
I was just going to say that every. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead and finish.
Okay, I was just going to say that everybody needs wins on a regular basis, no matter how small, to keep you going. So if you are not trying to do anything and you think everything is going to fall into your lap, you're probably going to be a miserable person. So no matter how small, really allow yourself a win in anything. I mean, some people are depressed and they lay around all day, but if that person gets up and they go for a walk or something, that's huge for them, And so allow yourself those things and with the hopes that those little wins will snowball and turn into something much, much bigger.
Do you agree that one of the biggest wins that we all should have is when we look in the mirror every day, no matter how bad the day's going or no matter how bad we feel, when we look in that mirror, that we like and love ourselves. We have to like ourselves first, but we like and then we love ourselves for who we are, warts and all.
Yes, I do, but I also recognize that for some people, that's difficult to do because they've been told their whole life by others that they're not worthy. And so their brain gets locked into that message. And so for some people, that's harder for some than it is others.
But if they can
especially
do it,
if you don't know.
That's a big one.
What's that?
I said, if they can do it just one day a week, and then make it 2 days, that becomes a big win for them.
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
What were you going to say?
I can't remember. I think I was just going to say that for some people that's really hard to do that if they have been told by others that they're not worthy. To look at yourself and to actually, especially if you don't even know who you are, which is something that's really at any age really. When you're trying to find yourself, whether you're a preteen or a teenager or much older, life is this constant, journey of finding who we are as people. And the more we find out and the more we actually accept those things, then the more comfortable we get. But on the other hand, too, I think that there are some things that sometimes we need to change, character flaws. Maybe we're stubborn, maybe we're pessimistic, or maybe we're negative Nancys, who need to lighten up a little bit, and or maybe we're not, maybe we can be rude. And so sometimes we need to change the little things about ourselves. But nevertheless, whatever it is that we need to conquer, then trying is what it's all about.
Trying is success.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Yvonne Mason, and as you can tell, we are Off the Chain. That is the name of the show. And my guest tonight is Chad Lutzke, and he is an author. His books are absolutely fantastic. If you have not read them, the first one I highly recommend is A Foster Homes of Flies. You will not want to put that book down. And when you do, you will feel like that your heart is broken in 1,000 pieces. But it is one of the best books I have read, and I have read thousands and thousands of books. On Wednesday night, next Wednesday night, September the 28th, my guest will be author Frank Bittinger. He is another horror author. It will prove to be an interesting night. And just in closing, Chad and I have gotten a little bit heavy here at the end about life and life in general and liking and loving yourself. And what I want to tell people is this. We're only here for a short time. In the blink of an eye, we're gone. And the one thing we should always ask ourselves is, what do I want to leave behind? Because we do leave behind something. Good, bad, or indifferent. We do leave behind something. So I ask you all to leave behind this one thing. I ask you to make a difference, even if it's in one person's life, even if it's with a smile, a handshake, or a pat on the back, or a hug, because you don't know the road that other person is traveling. So make a difference. Leave that behind. Chad, I want to thank you, my dear friend, for the honor and the pleasure and the privilege of being on my show. It has been enlightening, informative, and fun.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on here.
And I will get with you, and we will set you up for after the first of the year, because I want to get caught back up, and by then I will have read all of these wonderful books, and we will discuss them in great depth. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say that I have enjoyed you. Those of you who have been with me from the beginning, thank you for the honor and privilege of inviting me into your homes. And we will see you next Wednesday night, October the 28th at 8 o'clock Eastern with author Frank Bittinger. This show will go into archives, so feel free to download it, share it with your friends, and it will be on other podcasts as well. And with that, I will say until next Wednesday night, good night. And Chad, stay with me for a few minutes after the show ends, and we'll chat for a minute. And
okay.
Okay. Now, whatever we say now will go into the archive show. But I wanted to thank you again for coming on tonight. And I enjoyed it very, very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, just pimp the show.
I will.
And like I said, it doesn't have to be authors or musicians or anybody that's in the craft that we're in. If somebody's got a business or a platform or a foundation, because we're only as successful as we help each other to be. And what I will do when I put the podcast up on Spreaker and SoundCloud and Mixcloud, podcast and podcast.com, when I upload them, I will put the link up and I will tag you in it, and then you can download any of these on iTunes, on Stitcher, on TuneIn, on YouTube, on any of the podcasts, or even on Blog Talk. You can download them, put them on your website, use them in any way that you want to, take snippets out of them, do whatever you want to with it to promote yourself. That is my gift to you. All right, my dear?
Thank you.
All right, sweetheart. And I will talk to you later.
All right, Yvonne. You have a good night.
Thank you. You too, honey. Bye-bye.
Bye.